Human design is knowledge of the form. It's knowledge of the body and how the body works at a mechanical level. So, while the human design system has a cornucopia of information for the mind, all this information is really there for is to align you with yourself. It's so that you can trust yourself and so that you can know what parts of you are you, what parts of you can trust. So when you're looking at the body graph, you're seeing colored centers and you're seeing blank, white centers. And all of the filled in centers, the ones with color, are defined. And this is you. These are the parts of you you can trust. But everyone's been spending their whole lives trusting what isn't them and ignoring what is them. Which is to say, they've all been trusting the not self, the openness in the chart, these undefined centers. And the undefined centers are not bad. There's no bad design. It's that the undefined centers are vulnerable. They take in the other. And we build up mental defense mechanisms and have mental decision-making processes as a way of coping. So I'll go into the full description of the centers later in the reading. But consider, for now, just consider the solar plexus. That's the triangle on the right side of the chart. So you have a completely open solar plexus. You have no activations in the solar plexus. The solar plexus is the center of emotion. What does it mean to have an open solar plexus? Well, it means quite simply that you're taking in the emotional states of others. And there's nothing good or bad about this. I mean, it's not a moralistic thing. It's not that one's better than the other. Because, this will make you deeply empathic. It has its advantages. But it's something to realize that when you take in the emotional states of others, when they're happy, you'll be even happier. When they're sad, you'll be even sadder. If they have repressed emotion that they're bottling up inside, you'll feel it just by sitting in their presence. You'll feel an oppressive, smothering weight, Or if they're doing the opposite and they're discharging their emotions, you may get amped up by that. You might be more impulsive than usual when you're around somebody who's impulsively dumping their emotional state. So it's the thing to realize that having these open centers is not a bad thing. It simply means that you take in the other. And it has the potential for great wisdom. That open emotional center can become wise in this life about everything that has to do with the emotional states of oneself and others and how emotions work and, what's exciting and what's boring and who's exciting and who's boring, what's pleasurable and what's painful. What does it really mean to be happy or sad? And all these other things that are in the realm of the solar plexus, of the emotional center. So you have this tremendous potential to become wise about all these things as you have a window to the world, so to speak. In fact, people who are defined emotionally typically don't even know what their emotional state is. They need people like you who are undefined to tell them. They need people like you to confront them so that when they're working on something and they feel really sad and they're on the down part of their wave and they just want to give up, you can say, no, don't be impulsive. You're just sad. And they'll go, wow, I guess I am sad. I didn't realize I was sad. And when they're really happy and they're impulsively wanting to buy a new car or buy tickets for a trip, say, hey, you should sleep on it. You're really excited right now. You should give yourself time. And so you can actually be a tremendous, valuable influence in the lives of people who have emotional definition because they're riding this emotional wave. And they're impervious to the emotions of others. That's the trade-off, right? They're emotionally defined, so they're in their own emotional wave, basically unaffected by others' emotional states. You're open emotionally, so you're taking in the emotional states of others. So you're highly susceptible. But the trade-off is you become very wise about it. You become very aware of it. And they're not aware of it. They're happy and they don't know it. They're sad and they don't know it. They don't know about others' emotional states. It's so jarring to see two people who are emotionally defined and in different phases of the emotional wave. You know, I have a friend who had a terrible fight with his wife, and he came over and so down, and he's emotionally defined, and he was so down in the dumps, and he was just, you know, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing okay, but he really wasn't okay. And then I had another friend who had just seen her favorite band, and she came over and he said, how's it going? It's going great, wow, you know, and it was so jarring to see the two of them. And after we'd spent time together, she said to me after, wow, that guy something was wrong with him, huh? Like, that was as far as it got. She couldn't actually feel his emotional state. She certainly couldn't align to it. You know, and then he said afterwards, what was her problem? She was just like hyper, like she was on something. And so that's about as far as it goes. I mean, obviously they notice that the other person's in an emotional state, but they can't attune to it. They can't feel it because they're so stuck in their own emotional state. They're so stuck seeing through rose-colored glasses or some other color of glasses. So it's very, very different. For you, as someone who's emotionally open, you can align to the emotional states of others. Now, it can also be involuntary, you know, in the sense that you might be in a great groove and you're having a great time and someone comes over and suddenly the rest of your night is ruined because of their emotional state. And so there is something that happens with this undefined emotional center, and all of the centers have this as their not self theme, is that we begin to build up a mental defense mechanism against that vulnerability. So the undefined solar plexus has a mental defense mechanism of avoiding confrontation and truth. It's going to avoid rocking the boat, avoid giving out painful truths, because it doesn't want to make the other person have a big emotional reaction about it. It's going to be too considerate. It's going to walk on eggshells around people. So that's the thing, is these mental defense mechanisms, they build up over time, and then we identify with them, and we start to trust, or since childhood, we're homogenized into trusting the mind for making decisions. And suddenly we're not trusting the body. Very young children sometimes trust the body, but it's typically they're, you know, coerced through parenting and through school and everything else to go back to trusting the mind, and the mind kind of pulls them away. And so, you know, and I'll go into what it is to trust the body soon. I'll go into your strategy and authority as a generator. But the basic idea here is that, you know, you need to make decisions as a generator with your sacral authority, but having the undefined solar plexus and the other undefined centers is going to be, there's going to be these mental defense mechanisms that have built up. Right? So you're going to have mental defense mechanisms around, you know, maybe I shouldn't say that because I don't want to hurt that person's feelings. Because if I say that, they might have an emotional reaction, and I might have to deal with all this emotion from them. So we'll return to the not-self themes of the undefined centers. But in the beginning, I'd actually just like to go over the fundamentals of your chart, which is really to say how you're designed, the mechanical processes of the form. And so we're going to be going over type, strategy, and authority, and then we'll go into profile. And I may cover some characteristics of your design as well in the form of channels and gates. And this will just be an overview, because human design really is a vast science. But the reason I'll go into this is basically so you can get familiar with some of the concepts and keywords and how they play out specifically for you, and then also so you can start experimenting, because it really is an experiment. And the experiment is to see what happens when you follow your strategy and authority, to see what happens when you live as your design. And so that's really the crux of what human design is all about. It's about giving you the tools and the awareness to start experimenting. And really the experiment is up to you. It's something for you to see what happens and to explore. And all these characteristics that I'm telling you, they can be guideposts, they might help you somewhat, but really what it's about is the experiment. And ultimately it's about usurping control of your decision making from the mind and returning it back to a mechanical process of the form, of the body. You're a generator. So being a generator, more precisely a manifesting generator or a generator with manifesting potential, but I'll go into that in a moment. But you're a type of generator. And all generators, all manifesting generators, and different varieties, have the Sacral Center defined. And so that Sacral Center is the red square towards the bottom of your body graph. And having a defined Sacral Center means that you have a tremendous energy within you, tremendous life force, and that the life force needs to be used. The worst thing for the generator is for that life force to go untapped. It causes all sorts of ill health, all sorts of problems. It's the worst thing. So what it needs more than anything is to be used. But it can't just be used on anything. It has to be on something that's satisfying. It has to be used for work that brings satisfaction, for the correct thing. So every morning you wake up with a full tank of gas. You have all this energy. And now if you're waking up tired and exhausted, that probably means that the generator motor has broken down, so to speak, from dealing with so much frustration and so much resistance. But ideally, the generator wakes up in the morning full of energy, and they have to use that energy by the time they go to sleep at night. And it's not correct for a generator to fall asleep until they've used all that energy. It's fall asleep when you're exhausted. Don't have a bedtime. Don't force yourself to go to sleep at a normal time simply because that's what you've decided. Use that energy. And the things you use it on have to be things that you respond to. So, I do consider your profile to be that of the manifesting generator. However, you do not have the traditional manifesting generator configuration of having a motor going directly to the throat, which means that you do operate more like a generator in some sense. The generator is a bit slower and more methodical and one at a time. Now you're able to do what the manifesting generator does, which is to juggle many things at once and to have many things going on and to start and stop things. And so that's true for you. And when you read descriptions of the manifesting generator, that's true. It's just something to keep in mind that you're a non-standard manifesting generator. So you're going to have some elements of the generator as well. And remember, both of these are types of generators. They're both types of generators, basically. The big difference is that the manifesting generator, it's correct for them to have a lot of half-finished projects. So it's fine for you to have more things going on than you're able to finish. And it's fine to just quit those things that aren't working out. So that's correct for the manifesting generator. It's fine for you to start doing something and then realize it's wrong for you and then stop doing it. But many of the dynamics of the manifesting generator are going to be the same as that of generators. Especially in your case, where you're what is traditionally called the generator with manifesting potential, which means you're going to operate a lot like a traditional generator, and then sometimes you're going to have that manifesting component. Now, manifesting in human design means something very specific. It's not really about making a vision board and manifesting that into your life. It is similar, but it's basically about initiating a change in direction where you have, it is like having a vision and making it happen, but it's also about essentially guiding or directing things. And so the manifesting generator still cannot initiate in the beginning. If you initiate in the beginning, you're going to be met with resistance, because all generators, including generators with manifesting potential and manifesting generators, all need to wait to respond. Okay? Waiting to respond is your strategy. And the way that works is that when you wait and you act out of response, then you're in the dance. You're not pushing the river. You're not pushing against resistance. You want to talk to somebody at a party, instead of walking up to them and going, "Hey, how's it going?" You just wait, and then they notice you and they come over to you, or you lock eyes, then you can talk. It's waiting for the right timing. Generators and manifesting generators with manifesting potential will often interrupt others without realizing it. You walk up to the barista and say, "Hi, I'd like a cup of coffee." And that barista is just going to go, "Ugh," because here's someone who's just interrupted their flow. And if you just stand there and you wait to respond, it all works out. And waiting to respond works in so many different ways. You text someone and they don't text back. You wait for their response. You don't send another text. You get up in the morning and you walk downstairs and see your friend in the kitchen or whoever it is. And, if you say, "Hi, good morning," they're going to ignore you because you're not being yourself. See, the generator is yin. It's receptive. It's responsive. You have all the power in the world when you're responding to things, and none when you initiate. But because you have manifesting potential, once you've responded, then you can initiate. It's kind of like a pure generator has to continue to respond. So they're approached by someone at a cafe, and that person says, "May I sit down?" And that generator goes, "Please do." And they start talking. At no point in that conversation can the generator initiate. They continually wait to respond. You, as a manifesting generator, you're in that conversation. You've entered into it correctly. They approached you. You've responded to them. Then you can initiate. You can say, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to go for a walk. Do you want to come with me?" That's like fingernails on a chalkboard for a traditional generator. The traditional generator can never do that. But because of your manifesting potential, you are able to direct things to a degree once you've entered into them correctly out of response. So your strategy is to wait to respond. Your authority is your Sacral Center. That red square, the second from the bottom of the body graph, that's the sacral. Also pronounced sacral. I like sacral because it's sacred. The generators are the life force of the planet. And having that sacral center as your authority means the only thing you need to make decisions is to listen to it. And it comes out in sounds. It doesn't talk with words. It does lend inflections, tones of voice. But here's the thing. When we're talking, when we're using words, that's meant to be our outer authority. Our outer authority. How we give authority to others. How we act as an authority to others. How we teach others. How we convey information to others. That's what talking is for. It's not for decision making. But so many generators out there, the vast homogenized plane, they're asked, do you want to rent this apartment? And they talk it through. Well, let's see. Let's look at the pros and cons here. On the plus side, it's going to be in this neighborhood that I like. But on the negative side, it's a little more expensive than I want to spend. And they're going to talk through it. And they're going to make a mental decision. Human design is about cutting through that mental decision-making process. When someone asks you a yes or no question, try answering with a sound. And if you can't muster a sound, at least listen to your tone of voice. Do you want to go to the movie on Sunday? Yeah, that sounds good. That means no. Do you want to go to the movie on Sunday? That's true. Right? Sometimes you get no response because there's not enough information. Do you want to go to the movie Sunday? Which one? Right? Because in those cases, you're not actually going to get a response because you don't have enough information yet. So to experiment with your strategy and authority, you simply wait. You don't initiate conversation. You're not the first one to speak. You can look at people, you can make eye contact, but let the aura do the talking. Practice being present and allowing your aura to draw people in, because you have a magnetic aura. All generators do. It pulls people in. And with this magnetic generator aura, you don't have to initiate. And when you wait and respond, you're getting off on the right foot. And you're not stepping on any toes, and you're not meeting resistance. And ultimately, you're not going to be frustrated. Because that's what it's all about for the generator. Generators can be more frustrated than anyone. And generators are the great quitters. They quit when they're so frustrated. But by waiting to respond, you can enter into what is correct for you. So waiting to respond. Don't take the first step. Then follow your sacral response. It has an auditory component. There's also a feeling. It's a feeling of being galvanized or energized on the one hand, or of being drained or innervated on the other. Someone asks me to do a human design reading for them. Is it energizing or is it draining? Someone asks you to spend time with them. Maybe it's a good old friend. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. That's the thing. We get so conditioned and so homogenized that we feel terrible to say no to an old friend. Do you want to get lunch with me? Yeah, that sounds great. That means no, because there is no sacral energy behind it. If they say, do you want to get lunch with me? And you go, that means yes. Because it's spontaneous, it's natural, it comes from the belly, from hara is what they call it. In Japan, there's a notion of hara. Hara, it's this place below the belly button, deep in the belly, that kind of emanates sound. And generators make all kinds of sounds. Everything. It's like, that is the truth. The truth is in the sounds. There's no truth from the mind. So it's a great talisman in life, because you can be there thinking about what you should do, feeling all this anxiety or fear or nervousness or just plain old concern. And ultimately, you don't have to do anything except wait to respond. It's a great relief. And as you deepen into this trust, this experiment, you become able to trust your sacral response more and more, So you wait to respond more and more, and suddenly you're not thinking about what you're going to do. You're not thinking about what decision you're going to make. You're just making decisions. You're making your decision when the time comes to make the decision. You're not trying to answer questions before they're asked. You're not playing out situations in your head before they happen. You're just trusting that you can enter into a flow and make the decision in real time as it arises. So we're going to go over some of the characteristics of your chart. I will touch on some channels and gates, then I'll talk about your profile. The channels and the gates are going to be characteristics of you, of what is really you. But the interesting thing is that these don't tend to actually help you all that much, in that they don't tend to actually be dilemmas. They're not dilemmas because they're things that happen automatically, that happen on their own, and that are essentially fixed characteristics of you. And so they actually have more to do with how you influence others. The dilemmas are all in the not self. The dilemmas are in the open centers. Your fixed characteristics don't really cause dilemmas because they're just how you operate naturally. Nevertheless, it can still be useful to be aware of these characteristics. And you can see how they operate. And they can be signposts for the mind, because ultimately this information is about giving comfort to the mind so that it can release its vice grip of control over the decisions. So this is all about making the mind comfortable enough so it can go, okay, everything's okay. This is the way it's supposed to be. Everything's operating as it should. And that gives the mind trust to allow it to deepen into the experiment of seeing what happens when you follow your strategy and authority. All right. So I'll start with the channels. Channels are the life force energy that give you definition. The channels connect the aspects of your chart, the centers. And so you'll see that you have colored in centers, the defined centers. And what happens is these channels are what is defining those centers. It's what's activating those centers. And each channel has a certain theme to it, and it has a certain type of circuitry to it. So you have the 214. That's going from the sacral to the G center. This is a very powerful channel. If we look at what the sacral is about, it's about having energy. And the G center is the center of identity, of purpose, of direction. So this is, quite simply, the power to be yourself. It's the energy to be yourself. And it's funny, because you might assume that everyone has that energy. But it's just not true. Not everyone does have that energy. Not everyone is empowered to be themselves. This is nicknamed the channel of the anchor. And you see it in the charts of anchormen and anchorwomen. It confers a certain trustworthiness that people will trust you because they see in you that you're really yourself, that you're impervious to influence. It's an individual channel. And as an individual channel, it means that it's about being yourself. There are different kinds of circuitry to the channels. There are collective channels, which is about how we connect with the world at large. There are tribal channels, which is how we connect in intimate relationships with friends and loved ones and family members. And then there are individual channels, which is about who we are for ourselves. And these individual channels carry the keynote of empowerment. What's interesting is that The individual isn't trying to empower anyone else. It simply does empower by example, because you're empowered. When you're empowered, you empower others. And so carrying this 214, what it really means is that it's important for you not to let others interfere. The individual does not want to be interfered with. For someone who doesn't carry any individual channels, they're made to let others interfere with them, to let others meddle in what they're doing. But with your individuality here, it's important that at least in this particular aspect, which is what you're doing with your sacral energy and how it's feeding into your G center and your life purpose and your direction, do not let others interfere with that. Do not let them meddle. Stay true to what's important to you. And the individual carries melancholy. The individual always carries melancholy. What's important for those who have individual circuitry is to not try to explain the melancholy. Don't try to put a label on it. Someone asks you, "Oh, why are you sad?" As soon as they ask you, as soon as you start looking for reasons, that melancholy changes. And it's no longer beneficial. It becomes a problem. See, melancholy is very beneficial by itself. It's telling you to be alone. It's part of individual circuitry because it's important to spend a certain amount of time alone when you're melancholy, going inside. And it's actually the most fertile time for creativity. So when you feel melancholy, do not try to ask where it came from. Do not try to figure out its source or place blame on yourself or others. Simply accept that it's a signpost, that it's time to spend some time alone, and it's a fertile, creative time. It's a time of turning inward. Because the melancholy is always waiting for the mutation. It's always waiting for a change to come. That's the thing about individuality, is that individuality is mutative. It brings new things into the world. It brings changes into the world. And in order to do that, it can't be interfered with. You have your own direction that's yours. And it can be totally new in a direction nobody else has ever gone before. That's what the 214 is about. It's about the energy to go somewhere new, to go in a direction others haven't gone, that's correct for you. It can be innovative. It can be mutative. But again, it's so important that you allow it to operate. And because it's a sacral channel, it's going to connect directly to your sacral response. You're going to have sacral responses that guide you in new mutative directions. You also have the 8-1. The 214 and the 1-8, or 8-1, are two incredible channels. They start with the first and second hexagram. The 214 begins with the second hexagram, 2, and it connects to the 14. The 1-8 starts with the first hexagram and connects to 8, right? So these are fundamental. Of the 64 hexagrams, these are the first 2. And the 1-8 is also individual. It connects from the G center to the throat. So you'll notice that column running up the middle from your sacral to your G center, then from your G center to your throat. The 1-8 is often seen in the body graphs of entertainers. A lot of entertainers have this design because it's creative. It's about creative self-expression. You have all this energy to be yourself coming from the sacral, and then how does it get expressed? It's up through the throat. And so it can be very verbally creative, creating all sorts of new modes of expression, new words, new ways of being, and very idiosyncratic. It's very much you. You know, it's It's irreplaceable. It's unique. It's individual. And again, it has that theme of melancholy and that need to take time for yourself when you feel that melancholy, and to not let others interfere with your creative expression. You have two other channels going from the G center to the throat. These are the 31-7 and the 33-13. And they're both collective. The collective is so different from the individual. So you have to realize that part of you is deeply individual, but you also carry the collective energy of being able to communicate with strangers, communicating with the world at large, being part of the collective. That 31-7 is called the channel of the alpha, and it's a channel of leadership. And it's funny because people who have this often don't want to be leaders, but they're recognized and nominated by others. Others recognize your leadership potential. The best leaders are always the ones who aren't trying to be leaders. You're simply recognized. It's a projected channel, just like the 1-8, just like the 33-13. And being a projected channel, it has to be recognized. And so that channel of the alpha is a logical channel. And it's about logical expression of formulas and of efficiency and of improvements and all of these things. Then on the other side, you have another collective channel, the 33-13, the channel of the storyteller. And that's abstract. The logic and the abstract are the two types of collective circuitry. The logical is concerned with improvement, with making things better, with perfecting them, with getting the formula down. And on the other side, the storyteller is abstract. It's concerned only with having experiences, then being able to relate those experiences. And you'll tell stories to others and they'll tell you stories, and storytelling will be this big theme in your life. Because one thing I should mention is that when you carry a channel, you bring that channel out of others as well. Others are empowered to be themselves when they're around you and to follow their direction. They're empowered in their creative expression around you. They're empowered to be leaders. And they're empowered to tell stories and to share. And this is what it means to have these channels that you carry. 3 channels side by side going from the G center to the throat. It's quite a thing. And so that storyteller is going to gather life experiences. It's going to go through life gathering experiences that it can then abstract from. This is the meaning of abstraction in human design. Abstraction means that you're essentially having experiences and then abstracting things from those experiences. So the word abstract can be vague. Sometimes people think it means to generalize something. Well, in human design, it means something very specific, which is simply to extract from an experience. So you're having an experience, and part of that life experience, part of what it is to be experiential, is that you only have the experience once. Just once. You can never have that same experience again. So what you do is you revisit that experience through memory. And each time you revisit it, you're able to extract something new from it. Now you have a number of gates as well. And these gates will be fixed characteristics. For instance, you have gate 64 in the head. This is going to be about trying to make sense of things and the pressure to make sense of them. Gate 18 in the spleen, This is about improving things. It's a logical gate. It's about making things better and knowing how to improve them. Gate 26 in the ego. This is all about having nerve, all about selling yourself, and so on. Gate 41 in the root. This is the pressure to fantasize and then to take action from that fantasy and get out there in the world. So there are these characteristics and many more, and I would invite you to explore them over time, because they can bring you great comfort in recognizing how they operate and recognizing that as you deepen into yourself, these characteristics are going to flourish and you're going to be able to accept them in a very deep way. There's a big part of human design that is simply surrender. It is self-acceptance. And things that seemed like they were problems are revealed to not be, to be important parts of who you are. And so, all these characteristics I've described, these channels that you have, these gates, they're really what happens automatically for you, and to study your body graph gives you this richly detailed vocabulary. It's like getting a 64-letter alphabet, where each of the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, can be used in different ways and understood in different ways and deconstructed, and it's quite beautiful. You also have the 1156 channel. That's your channel that goes from the ajna to the throat. It goes from the gate of ideas to the gate of stimulation. It's curious. It's wanting to come up with ideas and to express them to people and to communicate with people. You have 4 throat channels. There's a lot of expression here. You only have one channel that's not connected to the throat. So I see a very powerful ability to express and to communicate. The other thing I'll mention is that you have no tribal channels. And so the tribal is something that you can learn about as you decondition. Because just like those open centers, you start out trying to be the thing you're not. You have undefined solar plexus, so you're not an emotional person. But you identify with that and try to be an emotional person. And you try to be warm. Well, guess what? You're wired cold. You're not wired to be warm. Empathic, yes, but warm is something else entirely. And it's the same with the kinds of circuitry you have. So you have 2 individual channels. You have 2 collective abstract channels. You have 1 collective logical channel. So you know how to engage with the collective. You know how to be yourself. What you don't have is the tribal. Your obligation as an individual with individual circuitry is to be empowered, to not let others interfere. Your obligation as a collective being with your 3 collective channels is to share your ideas. With gate 11, someone comes to you and you want to get rid of them, just say, give them an idea. This is oh, Johnny, why don't you go play outside? You want to get rid of somebody, they're bothering you, give them an idea. You have an obligation to share your formulas, to share your ideas, to share your life experiences. But you do not have an obligation to support. You do not have an obligation to make promises. You do not have an obligation to enter into bargains. These are tribal things. And you don't have tribal circuitry. People who carry the tribal circuitry are obligated in those areas. They're obligated to enter into bargains. They're obligated to do what's fair and to care about fairness. They're obligated to compromise. No, that's not you. So you'll find that you may identify with these tribal things. I want to be a supportive person. I'm supportive to my friends. I want to support them with material resources, with emotional resources. It's not you. You're not tribal. So as you're looking at these gates and circuits, these are just signposts. And it can be overwhelming at once, to take it in all at once, because, there's 64 gates in the I Ching. There's 36 channels, This doesn't happen overnight. And, truthfully, the only important thing is that you follow your strategy and authority. I mean, if it were possible to do a reading and just tell you, wait to respond, and trust your sacral, that's it. You don't have to learn one more thing. But all of this is here not to convince you, because it's not my place to convince, but to give you signposts that you can look out for, that you can notice and watch, and you can see how they play out in your life, and ultimately can help the mind surrender and deepen into the experiment. The next thing I'd like to talk about is your profile. And I'll go into the profile, and then we will look at the undefined centers once more. And we'll look at the not self themes of the undefined centers. And the profile is again going to be a signpost of describing certain characteristics in your life. And it works almost like the costume that you wear, the roles that you play for other people. And then we'll finish by looking at the undefined centers and their not self theme, because that is at the core of human design, is the dilemmas of those undefined centers, and being a generator with manifesting potential, the deep frustration that you're running away from, that deep frustration where the undefined centers are essentially calling to you and trying to convince you to trust them, to trust your mind, and to pull you away from trusting your sacral response. And so as you become aware and as you watch these not self themes, you become immune to them. And they no longer have the same pull. And you're no longer avoiding confrontation and truth with the undefined solar plexus. You're no longer going to be trying to prove things or trying to improve yourself with that undefined ego, or thinking about things that don't matter with that undefined head, and so on. So as we look at the not self themes of the undefined centers, you'll be given signposts to notice and really just to watch, because so much of human design is about surrendering and watching and really being a passenger. There's this notion of passenger consciousness where you cultivate the ability to watch your movie, to watch and to let the form make the decisions in life, and watch what your sacral decides. That's what it's all about. Your profile is the 1-3. The first line is called the Investigator, and the third line is the Martyr. To understand how the lines work, it helps to visualize a house. And there are 6 lines, and these are 6 divisions of the house, going from bottom to top. So you can look at the hexagram and see those 6 lines and see that the hexagram is basically showing you a house. And the first line is the foundation of that house. The second line is the ground floor. The third line is the end of the bottom floor, basically the stairway going up to the 4th floor. The fourth line is the foundation of the second floor. The fourth line is the foundation of the second floor. The 5th line is the 2nd floor proper, and the 6th line is the roof. And so you can kind of visualize that it's divided between lines 1 through 3 and lines 4 through 6. And lines 1 through 3 are called the lower trigram, and lines 4 through 6 are the upper trigram. So your profile, the 1-3, carries the 1st line and the 3rd line, and it's fully lower trigram. Being fully lower trigram, it means it's not about other people. It's not about the transpersonal. It's about you and what you're doing. And there's no good or bad in any of this. There are benefits and dilemmas and all sorts of things, but there's no good or bad. But it's something to realize that the 1-3 is really here to learn about something on their own, to have their own process of going into things and of learning about them. And it can certainly teach others as well. This does not mean, in fact, first lines are amazing teachers, incredible teachers. They're like lifelong students who become teachers. So it doesn't have anything to do with your ability to impact the other. You impact the other in areas where you're an authority, actually. So it's nothing about that. It's simply to realize that you're not here to deeply know and tell the stories of other people's lives. You're here to have your own. You're not here to work through transpersonal karma with other people. You're here to follow your own destiny. That's what the lower trigram is. And the lower trigram sometimes has issues mentally modeling other people. I've heard a first line artist ask, "Do you think somebody out there might buy my art?" Well, yeah, it's really, really good. And an upper trigram would already have answered that question with extreme nuance and detail. You know, they would know exactly who and what, what, I guess you could say, demographic that person is in, and so on. Because the upper trigram is the marketing department. The lower trigram is the research and development department. So you're in research and development. You're not here to market, to sell what you're working on to others. You're here to research, to develop, to become the master. Because the first line carries with it the theme of moving from apprenticeship to mastery. It's the classic apprentice master, student to teacher. That's what it is. The first line is called the Investigator. It investigates, and it's trying to find a solid foundation. It's fundamentally an investigation from fear, and fear is not a bad thing. Fear is the seat of all intelligence. If we look at the lines like an evolutionary process, what comes first? The unknown. And what is our reaction to it? Fear. All fear is fear of the unknown in some sense. And so we start with the unknown. And the first line investigates it. And it learns about it. And it learns, if I go that way, there are trees that have fruit that I can eat. And if I go this way, there are saber-toothed tigers that might eat me. If you think back to prehistoric times, to cavemen and cavewomen, that's what this first line process is about, is what is the fundamental process of humanity? What is the first thing humans have to do? They have to get a solid foundation. And what is that foundation in? How is it solid? Well, fear is there to let you know it's not yet solid. When the fear is gone, it's like the tension is gone. And you feel like, okay, I can trust this. But first lines are always on alert for lies, for deception. You know, the parents tell the first line kid that Santa Claus is real, and then the kid finds out it's not. And they never forgive the parents at some deep level for misleading them. That's the first line right there. Other lines might not care as much about being deceived. It's very important for the first line. Because there is always this insecurity and this fear that the foundation's not really solid. And this is solid foundations in relationships, in jobs, in one's own skills, all of these things. That's what the first line wants. And it's the authoritarian. But it's humble. It's humble because it's not going to try to be the authoritarian when it's faced with other authorities. But it's not going to shy away from being the authoritarian when there are people who have less authority than it. In other words, it knows its place. This is also a first line quality. And if you think about what it means, if we go deep into the philosophy behind it, what is the philosophy of knowing your place? What is the philosophy of a hierarchy where you bow to the authority of some and you are the authority to others? Well, it's a deep wisdom that gets at a fundamental aspect of survival of the human race, which is the bonding of weak and strong. The weak have to bond with the strong, and the strong have to bond with the weak. Because if the weak and the weak bond together, and the strong bond together, humanity can't survive. So it's a fundamental wisdom of the necessity of strong-weak pair bonding. And this is why the weak student bonds with the strong teacher and learns until the teacher grows weaker. Then the student becomes the new teacher, and so on. It's apprenticeship to mastery. It's the researcher. It's the investigator. Its bonding strategy when it meets people is that of the penetrator, in that it wants to penetrate through their defenses. It wants to observe them. It wants to really get to know before it trusts. It doesn't just jump in. At the same time, it's also the pursuer and pursued, that of the caveman or cavewoman who goes out there, the hunter and the hunted. And it can go either way. And a lot of people are only comfortable being one of the two, only comfortable being pursued. Oh, that person didn't pursue me, therefore they're not correct for me. Or they're only comfortable pursuing. That person's running away from me, I better chase them. So for pair bonding, the first line is connected to ancient, early prehistoric modes of connection. It's truly the caveman, cavewoman style, going out there and finding the person for you. But what the first line ultimately wants is stability. It wants order. It's deeply unsettled by change. And then we have the third line, which is your unconscious line. Your first line is conscious. It's what you identify with. It's what you recognize in yourself. It's the first line personality. But you have a third line design. And the design is like the unconscious. It's a bit different. It's the body. And this third line is the martyr. It's the stairwell up to the second floor. And what it's trying to do is test the first and second line processes to make sure they're sound. So that first line spends so much time, 10,000 hours, building up expertise, building up mastery, spending all this time building its solid foundation. The third line wants to test and make sure that foundation is solid. The second line, which I haven't talked about yet, because you don't carry it, but it's relevant here, because it's the other part of the lower trigram, it doesn't want to do anything the first line wants to do. The first line's a lifelong learner. They want to spend their whole lives learning. Second line can't be bothered to learn. It's bored. It does poorly in school. It just wants to be left alone. It's called the Hermit. And it doesn't care about theorizing. It just wants to put it into practice. It just wants to live out its life existentially. And in so doing, what it's basically doing is it's saying, okay, you first line, you're preparing for everything that you know. You're preparing for everything within the horizons of possibility of what you know. But how do you prepare for something beyond that? How do you prepare for the unknowable, or prepare for the unpredictable? Prepare for something nobody's heard of yet. How do you prepare for that? So the first line is aware of the survival needs. It's aware of the need for food and shelter and money and material resources and building families and protecting them from harm and all of these concerns that people have. That's what the first line is doing. It's motivated to find out how to do those things. But the second line doesn't want to be bothered to learn all that stuff. What it does instead is it becomes a hermit and says, leave me alone. And then it's very discerning, and it tries to watch and get a feel for what's going to change and what isn't. And so it's almost in the realm of existential living where it becomes aware of what's changing and what's staying the same. Because at any moment, the whole rules of the game can change. And then that whole first line process of all that study and everything they learned, they spent 10 years learning a programming language. Pretty soon that programming language is obsolete. So the second line doesn't want to learn, but it is very in touch with a different aspect, I guess you could say, of the survival process. So the third line then comes along, and it basically just wants to test those first two. It wants to say to that first line, okay, you've done your research, you've done your homework, let's see how you did. And it wants to say to that second line, okay, you've been living your life, and you don't really want to learn anything, but you have all these natural talents. So let's see what those natural talents are. Show me, and I'll test them and see if they're worthwhile. So the third line is a real tester. And it's called the Martyr because it's often the first one to raise the alarm. It's willing to martyr itself in the name of anarchy, in the name of chaos, in the name of tearing everything down and starting all over again. So it's the first one to raise the alarm. If there's a workplace thing, the third line is going to be one of the first ones to quit, saying, this is not good treatment of the workers, because it's tested everything out and found out that it's not good. Where they're often the first ones to get side effects and drugs and so on. Now, as an unconscious process for you, this is not going to be the same as if you're a third line personality profile. The 3-5 and the 3-6 are third line personalities. And it's going to work out differently for you. You carry the third line theme, but in your case, there's tension between what your first line wants, which is mind, which was what your mind wants, solid foundations, order. Then what your unconscious wants, to break the bond, to start over again, to tear everything down, just chaos and anarchy. And so you're really torn between these order and chaos principles. That first line conscious just wants the same thing over and over again. It wants to perfect it and become the master of it. It wants to be the apprentice who becomes the master. That third line is ready at any moment to throw it all away and start over again. And it's so resilient. 1-3s might not realize how resilient they are, because at a mental level, the first line is actually quite fragile. It's fragile because it's insecure, and it's always looking for security. But that third line is so resilient because it's designed for trial and error. It's designed to make mistakes. It's designed to break things and to learn why it broke those things and not break them again, hopefully. That's the other thing about the third line. It makes so many mistakes. But being unconscious because it's on the design side, you may not even realize these mistakes, because they might not seem like mistakes because it's an automatic unconscious process. But then at a later date, you realize they were mistakes. And so as you realize that, the one thing you have to do, I always tell third lines this: don't stop making mistakes. First of all, you couldn't even if you tried. But don't stop that, because that's how the third line process works. It works through testing. It works through trial and error. It works through making mistakes, which is honestly how every scientific discovery is made. It's how mutation occurs. It's how progress happens. That's good. The only thing you have to do is tell people. Tell people about those mistakes. You know, you have a 1-3 who goes for a jog and they go smack, turn around a corner and smack into a wall. And they just pick themselves back up and keep going. They don't tell anyone. And the next day their friend does it, same thing. You know? Tell people. Tell people what paths you've been down so they don't have to go down those same paths. Because the third line wants to see for itself. It doesn't really want to believe what anybody else says. Now, of course, the first line will believe what others say. So that's why there's another tension here. The tension between the first line, following and obeying the rules of the master, and the third line saying, I'm going to be an anarchist. I'm going to go and see for myself what that's all about. So at different times, these different processes will come out. These are both aspects of you. The first line is the conscious one that's more readily apparent. The third line is underneath. And we have a tendency to ignore our unconscious line, which would mean most 1-3s out there are doing great at the 1 stuff. They're not doing great at the 3 stuff. They're doing great at building that solid foundation. They're not doing great about the bonds made and broken. They're in relationships they hate because they're afraid to break that bond. They're doing things out of that first line insecurity and wish for solid foundation. And they're not giving enough credence to the unconscious need for chaos and change and for testing and trial and error and making mistakes. You have the 1-3 that's in the same relationship for a long time. That's a first line thing. Third line makes and breaks the relationship. Either new different ones or the same one. But it's bonds made and broken. So if I had one piece of advice for the 1-3, keep doing that first line thing. Keep looking for that solid foundation. And then also make sure you're giving your third line its due. Make sure you're allowing yourself a bit of chaos. The undefined centers are vulnerable. They're vulnerable to outside influence, to outside conditioning. They are dormant, and then at key moments they activate in their defense mechanisms. For instance, your undefined solar plexus, when you're by yourself, you can be very still, like a still, calm river, and then somebody comes around and that person is emotional, and suddenly you're amplifying that emotionality. The undefined centers have a hierarchy in terms of their impact, from strongest to weakest. So I'm going to go through that hierarchy for you, looking at the strongest to weakest impact in terms of the not self. And so these are going to be the key dilemmas that are strongest in pulling you away from strategy and authority. And remember, all this is about staying aligned to your strategy and authority. So really, none of this information is necessary as long as you're making sacral responses. As long as you're making decisions, trusting your sacral, you don't need this. This isn't going to help you outsmart the system. The mind is always trying to be so clever and to outsmart everything, and it's not about outsmarting, it's about surrendering. So if anything, hopefully this information can help you surrender to that mechanical process of the Sacral Center. The strongest impact in terms of the not-self hierarchy is the ego. This is true for everyone. But around 30 or 35% of people have a defined ego. and therefore they are rather immune to it. But for the rest of us, the vast majority of the world is contending with ego issues. The ego is also called the heart, and it's interesting because we always think of the heart as the seat of emotion and the seat of love and all these things, and they are related, but it's a different kind of emotionality. You see, the undefined ego feels threatened, and it gets offended, and it gets emotional when it's threatened or when it's offended. So this is very different from the solar plexus emotions, where the emotions of the solar plexus are pleasure and pain, or excitement and boredom, or happiness and sadness. The ego gets emotional in the sense of getting its feelings hurt. It gets injured, and it feels threatened. As I'm talking, a dog starts barking, Dogs feel threatened when you walk up. It's the same thing. That undefined ego is going to feel threatened. It's going to feel competitive. And it's going to feel all these different traits that we associate with the ego. And what it's really about is that it doesn't have a consistent sense of self-worth. So, the not-self theme of the undefined ego is trying to prove its self-worth. Trying to prove things as a stand-in for self-worth. If I can convince that person, then they'll know that I'm worthy. Then they'll know that I'm worthwhile. Or trying to prove things to yourself. Trying to prove how much willpower you have. If I promise myself that I'll do this and I'll quit that and I will. Any will statement is willpower. Be very careful with will statements. With undefined ego, be very, very careful with what you say you will do or won't do. In fact, my advice for those with undefined ego is don't make any promises. Which sounds wild. How can you go through life not making any promises? How can anyone trust you? Well, the fact of the matter is, what they can trust is your sacral response. If they ask you, do you want to be with me? And you go, they can trust that. But if they say, promise me you'll be with me, and you say, I promise, can't trust that. Can't trust that, because what you're saying when you promise is that you will do something. You will devote, commit, and so on. And that requires consistent access to willpower, which is something that those with undefined ego do not have. And this can be a huge blow. It's like, what do you mean I don't have willpower? Where there's a will, there's a way. If I just will it, if I just have strong enough will, it'll come true. And so I've actually started at the absolute deepest core dilemma of the not-self. I didn't start on the surface and work my way down. I've started at the fundamental. So I could have gone the other direction with the mildest, sort of easiest not-self issues to deal with. But I actually went the opposite. I went to the core, fundamental not-self theme. And so if we had to summarize it, we could say, to condense it, that when we look at a generator or manifesting generator, such as yourself, with an undefined ego, what we find is, here is a being whose entire life is organized around avoiding frustration. And the way they feel they can avoid that frustration is by getting validation from others, by proving to themselves and others that they're good people, by proving to the world that they're worthy, that they have something to contribute, by improving themselves, by looking at everything in terms of, will this help me improve? Will this help me become better? This is the deepest conditioning. I can't stress enough how, you can spend weeks just on this one point, or years even, of surrendering and accepting yourself for who you are. And so to talk about it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes is almost silly. But I'm hoping that I can point you in a direction where you can pursue this on your own. Because what it's really about is there's nothing to improve. You don't need to prove. And you have nothing to prove. Nothing to prove, nothing to improve. There's nothing that you need to do in order to make yourself better, to make yourself worthy. It's all conditioning. It's conditioning that tells you you have to improve. People with undefined ego, one of the first questions they ask when they learn about human design, first of all, does it work? And then when you ask what they mean by does it work, they mean, well, does it make your life better? Does it make things better? Does it improve you? Does it make you a better person? Is it good for personal growth? Is it good for self-development? This is what the undefined ego cares about. And it's so backwards, because it's the defined egos that actually are designed to be able to improve themselves. And they don't want to. You have to get them to prove and improve things. You have to wrangle them into it. And they don't want to do it. Whereas it's the undefined egos that actually don't have to do that stuff. And they want to, and they're trying to. And not only are they trying to, their entire lives are organized around this. It's like the deepest, core dilemma. Your core dilemma with this undefined ego is going to be seeking love from other people, seeking approval and validation and respect and admiration, and proving to them and proving to yourself you have the stamina, you have the nerve, you have the courage, you're trustworthy, you're trusting, you're loyal, you're reliable. All those things, the good friend, the good partner, the good child, or the good parent. That's all undefined ego stuff. Every last bit of it. Doing things to improve yourself. Making yourself a better person. Oh, we can get really specific. We can get so specific here. You have gate 26 activated. Gate 26 is the gate of nerve. So here's this feeling. If only I have the nerve, I can avoid frustration. If only I can sell people. If only I can convince people. If only I can get up there in front of everybody and sell them on it. Then I'll avoid frustration. Then they'll like me. Then they'll approve of me. And all the other channels off the ego are totally open. That 2145, the 2551, the 4037, completely open channels. When you have open channels like this coming off an open center, it's the theme of denial and blame. It's the theme of, I don't have issues with trust. Other people have trust issues. I am a trustworthy, reliable person. Other people aren't trustworthy and reliable. I'm loyal. They're not loyal. I trust people. Other people have a hard time trusting. There's all this denial and blame. And what goes along with that, with these completely unactivated channels, is the feeling there's nobody else to really help you there. So you look at gate 51. It's about the courage to jump into the unknown. Well, first of all, you have that whole feeling of, I don't have problems with courage. Everyone else is afraid. Okay. But then you go a little deeper and you see that really what it's about is it's missing that 25. 25 is the gate of innocence, of having no ulterior motives, of being pure in your motives. And so you go with this completely open one. I can avoid frustration as long as I have the courage to jump into the unknown. But I have to do it myself because I can't trust anyone else because they all have ulterior motives. That's what you get, right? Or 21, the gate of control. Missing that 45, the gate of leadership and of material resources and of money. Well, here's the feeling. If I want to avoid frustration, I have to stay in control. I have to maintain self-control. I have to improve myself and get better at maintaining self-control because there's nobody else there with leadership. There's nobody else there who will give me those material resources. So you see, when they're completely open channels like this, it's the feeling that you have to do the thing, that you're on your own doing it, that nobody else is there to help you with it. I forgot to mention that in that 2551, that's the channel of initiation, the channel of rites of passage as well. So it's the feeling that you are on your own, confronting the unknown, that nobody else is there to initiate you. Nobody else is there to take you through that rite of passage. And with 4037, 40 is a love gate that basically, it's all about having capacity, the capacity to provide for others. It's a tribal gate. So it's all about this tribal bargain of entering into an agreement with others and living up to your end of the bargain, exercising willpower to make sure you meet your promise and meet your commitment. And in return, you get gate 37. That's the affection on the other end, the gate of the family. So gate 40 is the classic gate of, don't you see how hard I work for you? Don't you see how much I do for you? Well, because you have this channel completely open, there's going to be the feeling of there's no affection on the other side as a reward for all that hard work you do. There's no one there to provide that affection for you. You're not getting enough affection. And there's also that denial and blame theme of the problem is always other people. That's what it comes down to. It's, I don't have problems trusting people. Everyone else has problems trusting people. I have the capacity to help others. Others don't have the capacity for me. I have the time and energy to put into relationships with them. They don't have the time and energy to put into relationships with me. So all of this narrative is going on in the not-self theme of the undefined ego, all revolving around the central point of trying to prove to yourself, to prove to others. And you have nothing to prove. There is nothing to prove. Anytime someone gets you in an argument, this is what you notice. You notice, this is like the experiment, is watching and seeing what happens as you feel yourself get offended. As you feel yourself, your ego flare up, and you get wounded and you get hurt. And when you notice that happen, notice that part of you, that not self part of you, which isn't really you, but it feels like you, is basically trying to convince the other person. It's trying to prove something to them. That's what it's about. It's about watching, surrendering and watching and noticing how these aspects of the not self appear when you feel threatened, when someone's competing with you and you feel competitive, and so on. And just remember, you have nothing to prove. There's a great seduction. If only I can prove it to them, then I'll avoid frustration. And this is the deepest, this is the fundamental that everything else is based around. We look at what are basically the less impactful, the outer layers of the not-self. So we look at, for instance, the root. You also have undefined root, but this is on the opposite end in terms of how strongly and how deeply it impacts you. The root is the outermost layer compared to the ego that's deep down inside. So deep down inside is this feeling, I can avoid frustration as long as I prove and improve. As long as I get that love and validation and appreciation from others and I prove to them what a good person I am. But you're not going to show that to the world. In fact, if somebody calls you on it, you'll try to prove to them how much you have nothing to prove. If someone says you're just trying to get a compliment, you'll try to prove to them how much you don't care about compliments. Do you see how nefarious this is? People who have defined ego are very sparing with their compliments. They don't say thank you a lot. They don't show gratitude a lot. With undefined ego, because of that not self, we have people running around profusely, basically giving people compliments all the time. I can't tell you, if I do a reading for someone and they have defined ego, they might go, thanks. But if they have undefined ego, they're going to say, that was so amazing. I can't believe how much you told me. That's so wonderful, everything you did. And the thing to realize is that with that undefined ego, you're basically amplifying that feeling of gratitude. And on the one hand, it's sweet, it's nice. I don't want to diminish it. But on the other hand, there's a bit of an ulterior motive. And the ulterior motive is to prove to the other person how grateful you are. As if they wouldn't believe you if you just said thanks. As if saying thanks isn't enough, so you have to tell them how important and how special and so on. And it's all about trying to prove. I had a 1-hour conversation with a man once trying to prove to me that he never was trying to prove anything to me. He was trying to convince me. He was saying, Jonah, look, you totally misunderstand me. I'm not trying to convince you of anything ever. I do not convince people of things. And I said, well, why not? And he said, it goes against everything I believe in. And I will never try to convince you of anything. And I said, well, aren't you trying to convince me right now? He said, no, you're misunderstanding me. I'm telling you that I never try to convince anyone of anything. You can see how the undefined ego works. It's continually trying to convince. It's continually trying to prove. And that's deep down inside. So we look at the outermost shell, the undefined root. The undefined root is simply in a hurry to get things done. So that's what people are going to see. They're going to look at you. They don't see someone with low self-esteem or with variable self-esteem. They don't see someone craving affection or craving love or craving any of those things. What they see is someone who's in a hurry, and someone who's willing to be in a hurry for them, and someone who's susceptible to pressure, someone they can pressure and they can drive to do things, and they can push to do things, and they can give deadlines to, and someone who's going to fret over those deadlines to get that stuff done. But what they don't see is that all of that being in a hurry and dealing with that root pressure has a goal. And that goal is ultimately in the service of the undefined ego. The goal is, I better be in a hurry so I have enough time for improving myself later, or I better be in a hurry to prove to them how much I care. And it's ultimately about proving and improving and getting that validation with the belief, the underlying belief, that that is how you'll avoid frustration. There is such a fear of frustration in the generator. Like, that's how I'll avoid frustration. I can only avoid frustration as long as I prove to them what a good person I am. As long as I am a good person, and I have to prove it to myself, because I'm not convinced myself that I'm worthy. I'm not convinced myself that I'm good, right? And so there's a real push to try to prove and to improve as a way of avoiding frustration. The next strongest not-self theme is the solar plexus, avoiding confrontation and truth. The solar plexus doesn't want to let anybody else get too close to it. It wants to keep them at arm's length. And it basically is censoring itself or filtering itself, never really showing your true self to people. Instead, showing them a crafted image of yourself, because it's this feeling that they can't handle the real you. They can't handle you in your entirety. It's an awareness center, and so it skews how you see other people in the world. The ego is not an awareness center. There are only 3 awareness centers: the solar plexus, the ajna, and the spleen. So with the ego, what is distorted and amplified is how you see yourself, or even more so, a feeling that rises up in you of threat. With the solar plexus, what is distorted is very much the awareness. It's the feeling the other can't handle the truth. It's the feeling that others are essentially intrusive and must be kept at a distance because they'll pry and they'll find out who you really are, and they won't be able to handle it. And there are many particular themes within the undefined solar plexus for each gate. And so we can look at some of the specifics now. The overarching theme is avoiding confrontation and truth. So the overarching theme, you can simply ask yourself, am I avoiding confrontation and truth? And I've heard people that have undefined solar plexus, and typically undefined ego also, try to prove to me how they're not avoiding confrontation and truth. I have no problem confronting people. And what does it mean to avoid the truth anyway? Well, confrontation in this sense, think about disappointing someone you really care about. You have to tell them something that's going to disappoint them. They have expectations of you, and you have to break them the bad news. You're in a relationship with someone. You have to tell them it's not working out. People who have defined solar plexus can do this quite easily. With undefined solar plexus, that not self-theme of avoiding confrontation and truth means they'll keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, and months will go by, and then the whole thing will explode. It's like a camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back theme, where the undefined solar plexus keeps putting it off until finally it's too much, and there's an explosion. That is what is meant by confrontation and truth. It can even be something simple like asking your boss for a raise. You delay it because you don't want them to think that you're not happy there. You don't want them to think that you're being critical or judgmental of them for not paying you more earlier or giving you a raise sooner. So that's what the undefined solar plexus is about. It's about being concerned for the other that they won't be able to handle it. And so putting off that confrontation and avoiding painful truths. It's escapism. And it's this feeling, again, because you're a generator, I can avoid frustration if I don't rock the boat. I can avoid frustration if I keep them at arm's length. I can avoid frustration if I don't give them the bad news. Oh, if I give them the bad news, then I'll be getting really frustrated. So there's so much of this mental decision-making. The entire life is designed around avoiding frustration. And that's not a life. That's the life of the mind. But truly, the life belongs to the body. And that's what human design is giving the life back to the body. So you can string these together even, how the undefined ego wanting to prove itself and the undefined solar plexus, which is wanting to walk on eggshells and tiptoe and so on. I'll prove to you how good I am about avoiding confrontation and truth. I can avoid frustration as long as I'm able to prove to others and convince them that they can trust me, that I won't call them out. And then we can enter into this promise or bargain together. I won't call them out and they won't call me out. And I'll find people in my life who don't intrude. I'll find people in my life who are also escapists. That's what the undefined solar plexus, not self-theme, is. Escapism. And you have a completely open solar plexus. It's so open and there's only 2 gates pointing at it. So if we think about the undefined solar plexus carrying a theme of being afraid of intimacy, a theme of keeping people at arm's length, not letting them get too close. Well, when you have all of these completely open channels connected to a completely open solar plexus, remember we have the theme of denial and blame. I don't have problems with intimacy. Everyone else has problems with intimacy. You know? I don't keep people at arm's length. They keep me at arm's length. I'm not afraid to show them who I really am. They're afraid to show me who they really are, and so on. And then we can go through some of the gates, and you might notice some of the specific fears. Every awareness center has its fears. The fears of the solar plexus are felt as nervousness, but they are a type of fear. With 3635, with gate 36, it's the only gate in human design specifically about sex. And it's about sexual experience as well. So we get the fear of sexual inadequacy. But with the whole channel open, I'm not afraid of being inadequate. Other people are afraid of that. I don't have sexual hang-ups. Other people have sexual hang-ups. I'm not afraid to tell people what I like and don't like in sex. Other people are afraid to tell me what they like and don't like. There's all that denial and blame. And remember, this is simply how the mind works to avoid frustration. If I really tell them what I really like, then I'll be frustrated. So I'd better not tell them. 22 and 12. 12 is the gate of articulation, and 22 is the gate of listening. Well, this is the fear of silent treatment. If I tell them, they won't talk to me anymore. This is the fear of having interesting things to listen to. This is the fear of being shunned and given the silent treatment. If I tell them what I really think, they won't talk to me and they'll give me the silent treatment. 4037, that tribal channel of the bargain. This is the fear of tradition. If I confront them, if I get to the truth, if I don't give them distance and space, and if I don't censor the image of myself that I present to them, I will be frustrated. And it's particularly going to happen if I go against their traditions. So why bother fighting the tradition? Let them have their tradition. And this is also, I don't have problems, being too traditional. Other people do. Not to say that you're too traditional, but that there's a fear of confronting people about their traditions. 6 and 59 is more specifically about intimacy, the fear of intimacy. And we can keep going. These all have specific qualities. For instance, that gate 30 is the fear of fates. If I really open up to someone and really get close to them, the fates will just take them away. If I really let them see who I truly am and have that deep intimacy, something bad will happen and the fates will intervene. So I'd better not let them get that close. I'd better not build that intimacy with them. So this is all the rationale for why it's a good thing to keep people at a distance. But it's not a good thing. It's a good thing to follow your sacral response. And if your sacral wants to keep them at a distance, great. But if your sacral wants to bring them close, even better. But it's important that you're trusting that sacral response and not this mental decision-making organized around avoiding frustration. The next is the spleen. And with an undefined spleen, it's the theme of holding tight, of not letting go to things that aren't good for you, or just plain not letting go in general. And it's so odd when you have the undefined spleen and the undefined solar plexus, because these themes are basically, I won't let go of you, but I won't let you get close to me either. I'm going to cling and cling and cling and hold on so tightly with the feeling, if only I keep holding on, then I can avoid frustration. But I'm also going to prevent you from ever seeing me or ever getting that close to me or ever having true intimacy with me, because I have the feeling, if I can keep you at arm's length, I can avoid frustration. So you see, it's all about avoiding frustration. And these are different mental decision-making patterns around what the mind is trying to do in order to avoid frustration. And with the solar plexus, the mind is trying to hide, to keep others from seeing you. And with the spleen, the mind is trying to cling with the feeling, if it just keeps holding on, if it doesn't let go, then it will avoid frustration. And with 18, I have to be critical, and I have to be judgmental, and I have to know how to improve things. And I just can't let go of that critical side, or I'll be frustrated. with 48 being pointed at by 16. What's wrong with me that I don't have enough solutions? What's wrong with me I'm not deep enough? If only I were more deep and had more solutions. And I'd better hold on to any solution that comes along. The next, we have the head. And that head is a mental pressure to think, to work things through. If I keep thinking about it, then I'll avoid frustration. If I can get through this confusion, then I'll avoid frustration. If I can make sense of it. And you have gate 24, the gate of returning. This is in the ajna. This is about going back over things over and over and over. But missing gate 61, there's that self-recrimination of, why don't I know? If only I knew more, then I wouldn't be frustrated. So with that undefined head, there's a tremendous feeling of needing to think about something, regardless of whether it matters or not, just to be free from that pressure. And the feeling when you're free from the pressure, then you'll be free from frustration. So are you thinking about things that don't matter? When you're thinking about something, ask yourself, does it matter? One of the best answers you can give when people ask you questions and you have an undefined head is, I don't know. Just say, I don't know. Because that undefined head tries so hard to know. And it's going to think about it and think about it and think about it. And it's going to say, well, I don't know, but let me tell you that I think this and this and this and this and this. No, just, I don't know. 3 magic words. Someone asks you something that you don't know, and you say, I don't know. It's so simple. But with the undefined head, there's a tendency to try to figure it out. There's a tendency to try to make sense of it. There's a tendency to think really hard about it. Because there's the feeling, if I keep thinking really hard about it, then I can avoid frustration. And finally, and the outermost layer of this onion is that undefined root that I mentioned, which is the other half of the pressure sandwich. There's 2 pressure centers, the head and the root. That undefined root is all about, I have to be free from this adrenal pressure, from the deadlines, from the tasks, from the stress. So I'd better hurry. And if I hurry, I'll be free from frustration. If I hurry, I can avoid frustration. So ask yourself, am I always in a hurry? Am I in a hurry right now? What's the hurry? What's the rush? So you can see how you can chain these together, all the way from the deepest undefined ego of trying to prove and improve, all the way out to the outermost, the root, being in a hurry. And you can chain these themes together. I'm going to prove to you how willing I am to think really hard about ways to work together and coexist without entering into each other's personal space. I'm going to get better at finding people who don't violate my boundaries. Ego, getting better, improving. Boundary violation, solar plexus, which is wanting to keep that boundary up. Of course, some people might really violate your boundaries, but there's also a hypersensitivity to that with the undefined solar plexus. I'll prove to you how good I am at not rocking the boat. I'll prove to you how good I am at not letting go. A relationship turns south, and there's a feeling of, if I let go of this person, I'll be frustrated. I can't let go of them. And I have to get better at not letting go. You can see how they all tangle together. I'll prove to you how quickly I will rush to think about ways to help you escape from life. Because again, the escapism from the undefined solar plexus. I'm not going to let go of the things that I found that improve my ability to work quickly. You can really juxtapose these all different ways, but the ego is about proving and improving. The solar plexus, avoiding confrontation and truth. The spleen, not letting go. The head, thinking about things that don't matter. And the root, being in a hurry to get things done. And so I invite you to juxtapose and play with the permutations of these themes and really just watch them. That's what human design is about. It's about passenger consciousness, where you watch these themes appear in your life, you track them, you notice when they appear. Like a game of whack-a-mole, you notice when the mole's head pops up. You notice when your ego flares up and you feel threatened or you feel offended. You notice the solar plexus and the pit in your stomach of nervousness as you don't want to approach somebody about a difficult problem. You notice the spleen and how alone it feels and how cold and just alone and crappy when it has to let go and how tightly it wants to hold on. You notice the mental pressure of the head and the feeling of, I just have to be free from this pressure, and that same root pressure of, I'll feel so good when I get these tasks done. And you just notice them, and you become aware of them. And what happens, I would say you spend at least 1 year noticing these, by the way. It's not something you do in a weekend. And as you're noticing these not-self themes, they start to have less and less power over you. And you increase in your wisdom about each one of these areas in life. And it becomes easier and easier to surrender fully to your sacral response. And the sacral response is divine. It's sacred. And you're here. You have a very specific signature. You're here to find satisfaction. You're not here to be frustrated. And you will find that satisfaction, and you are finding that satisfaction the more you deepen into the experiment. Because it just happens. You have a magnetic aura that draws it to you. You don't have to do anything. It's these undefined centers and their mental defense mechanisms that are constantly getting in the way, that are meeting resistance, because they initiate, because they make mental decisions. So you don't have to do that. You have nothing to prove. You don't have to be in a hurry. You don't have to think about those things. You don't have to hold on. You don't have to avoid confrontation or truth. You can live your truth. And as you do, you'll find greater and greater satisfaction. I wish you well in your journey. Thank you for listening.